if you look at the analog music and the limited set of notes that we have to choose from, hundreds of years of music was being made, right? There's a few innovations that have happened, right? We went from 5 lines in Gregorian to maybe, what is it, 8 lines that we can draw our notes on, and then we have some helping things. But it's pretty much been the same for a long time. And then came along digital music, right? Early 80s, right? Late 70s, early 80s. And it's people like Herbie Hancock and a whole bunch of other people, right? But let me just take that example because I'm a jazz fanatic. Who have started experimenting with digitalizing in zeros and ones those original analog choices that you could make as a musician or as a composer. And there's never a shortage of music nor appreciation of it in any form or shape. The only thing that's happened is analog and digital has gotten blended. And the medium in which it's transported has changed over time. And I think that's the exact same thing that's happening to events. Only we're about 30 to 40 years late to the game.
Today's guest is designer, strategic advisor, facilitator, and co-creator. He's the author of the Event Design Handbook. He's the founder and managing partner of the Event Design Collective. Please welcome to the show, Ruud Janssen.
Take me to another place where the fairy tales don't end. Magical, magical land, magical, magical land. To another place where the fairy tales don't end. Magical, magical land.
Hello, Ruud. Welcome to the show. Great to have you. How are you doing?
Thank you, Jens. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great. So before we go into, of course, the Event Design Collective and a lot of events and innovation around events, tell us a little about who are you, what is your story?
Awesome. So I was originally born in the Netherlands, in the south of the Netherlands, quite close to Germany, actually, where you are.
Yeah.
And spent some time there learning about all the basics in life, you know. And then we were in the fortunate opportunity to, my dad worked for Philips, and we had the opportunity to live in various countries. So at age 8, I was parachuted into a French school equipped with 3 words of French, oui, non, and one word I can't say. And then, you know, got immersed for 2 years into the French kind of way of living, which was a very intense, but also very rich experience in hindsight. Like many experiences you go through, you know, learning a new language at that age is fairly easy. But then unlearning maybe some of the habits that you've had from a previous school and, you know, these things that change in life, it really kind of, I think, color you over time. Went back to the Netherlands, then we spent 5.5 years in Asia, in the Philippines, which was a really great way to spend your teenage years. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And then ultimately decided to, when coming back to the Netherlands, equipped with an international baccalaureate, I decided to study hotel management. I was fascinated by hotels. I'd lived in hotels when we relocated to different places, and hotels feel like family, at least when you live there for a while and you get to know the people. And I think they're fascinating places, both front and back of house. Got into that, spent some time in the US for a traineeship at one of the most worn down Holiday Inns you can imagine in downtown Providence. And I spent time for 6 months with an executive housekeeper that had survived 23 general managers over a stretch of 35 years. And she taught me the ropes of how to fold nylon linens that are just about as old as she was in that place. So, you know, rich experience in, you know, getting your hands dirty, literally, in that space. Ultimately ended up running 5-star hotels, which I really enjoyed for quite some time. And I kept running into events. And so events were a fascination. Ended up doing some executive education, at which time I reconfigured my thinking and thought, do I want to run a hotel, which is like a little village for the rest of my life? Or is there something else that I could be venturing into? Because a hotel is quite landlocked as a place. You know, you get stuck in one place, so you might know it inside out in the back of your hand, but you're stuck to the place, which is not a bad thing, you know, if it's if it's a 5-star hotel, because it's a very nice environment to be in, but it's also quite time consuming. You know, with a young family, when you have a family growing up, you really want to make sure that you're also there for them and not just for the family that's in that hotel. So recalibrated my career with taking some time to think in the executive education space, and then went into the professional conference organizing space because they were one of our best clients at the time. And as a director of marketing and sales at the hotel, I knew quite a number of the people, and they wanted to hire me for a role in that company. So I spent quite a bit of time with that company. It was a family company, family business. That got expanded quite quickly over time, because those were the early 2000s in which, or mid 2000s, 2005 onwards. And really got to scale up and became place independent, running large-scale conferences and events. And these things really made me think, because events are omnipresent, they're omni-channel, they are used by anyone. They're probably one of the horizontals that goes across anything like the internet. Everybody does them, yet the ones that are done really well, you can probably, at least if you think back, I can count them maybe on 2 or 3 hands. So I realized I had an endless fascination for what makes events, good events, and mediocre events. And really try to start to decode that and figure that out. So as a side project, my colleague Roel Frissen and I, were perpetually talking about these things. And, we ended up with associations in this space, volunteering to do our bit to help and, get the community of people in the meetings industry together and figure out better ways of doing things. And that was a very interesting time when I ran also into Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model canvas in 2010 in Vancouver at the World Education Congress when I was on the board. And we did some work with him. I got very fascinated by applying the business model canvas to events and applying them to our space, primarily to redesign how the association functioned, the membership-based organization. But really, as we progressed through it, we figured out that this way of thinking is very effective, but it's also something that's direly missing in our space to be able to talk about how events create value. So that side project led to something called the Event Canvas, which we then published under Creative Commons. And that thing became a beast, and it's taken over our lives. And then we ran into Dennis, who had done some work on the business model canvas with Alex, because we lacked this visual language, and that's how we connected and really started applying innovation thinking and visual thinking and mental models and frameworks to create a language around it, and then try and test it and work with it with people that we knew from our networks. And that's how we kind of rolled into the design thinking applied to event space, which, like I said, has taken over our lives. It's now, there's 15 of us in different countries doing this, helping clients to figure out their stake in events, figure out how their events create value, and enabling their teams to learn how to use design thinking in event design in order to change behavior in the desired direction of change. And that's kind of the venture we've been on since 2014. We launched it at Valentine's Day. So it's easy to remember, 14 February 2014. So it's been a couple of years now, and it's been a fascinating journey. So that last episode is an entrepreneurial journey. We bootstrapped the company from scratch with sweat capital, which is painful the first couple of years. But it really gives you the grounding in letting go of all the things that you thought were very important to you, until you realize when something that drives you as a mission is something you really care about, and then it becomes almost effortless, or at least you can make it look effortless. It's not always effortless. And some people think it took us a year to come up with the event canvas, right, between 2013 and 2014, but it's probably more like 24 years plus 1 year to get to that point. Between the things that we did, we also realized quite quickly that what is it we've created, because at first it was just a side project, something that we thought okay, let's help this into the world under Creative Commons. And then the community came back to us and said, well, can I do this in my language? And we're like, okay, you can translate it. That's fine, right? And then people started asking, but how does it work? You guys make it look so easy. Can you like write down the steps? Okay, right. We'll write down the steps. We'll do that. Well, that turned into a facilitation kit. First, we thought it was a game. So, but there's no winners and losers in event design. So that's why we turned that into a facilitation kit with roll cards. And it's a thing people can do as a team. And then we added a lot of questions to the canvas itself, so people could have a self-guided way of doing it. After that, people said, well, can you teach us how to do it or do it with us? And that's how our first client, knocked on our door asking, can you guys come and help us out? Because we have a high stakes event, so we're not sure we can do it ourselves. That caught us up in developing kind of the consultancy practice. And that also caught us up in, well, what we can do, others can do too. So we scale it by teaching others how to do that. That's how we created a certification program, Event Design Certificate Program. And we then ended up bringing that to students. So there's now an Event Design Certificate Young Professionals program that's embedded into universities. So people take this as part of their bachelor's or associate or master's degree now in different universities. And then people that took our program to become a certified event designer came back to us and said, can we do it a second time? And we were like, why would you want to do that? Are we such poor teachers that, you need to come again? Because, people go through kind of a 3-day training to be facilitators of the design process. And after the 3 days, they get 6 months to actually go and do an event design with their team and submit it back for peer review. But what happens is people want more practice because they really enjoy working on different types of projects, maybe outside of their own project, because it gives them, space to think differently, or, they're in a different environment. And so I think we created that environment out of practicality and pragmatism of just, instead of just taking case studies and things that anyone can do, we ask everybody to bring their challenge. We pick one during the program, and that's the one we crack in 3 days. So people wanted to keep coming back. And then they said, well, can we do what you do in our own country? And so, Ruud, Dennis, and I looked at each other and said, how quickly are we going to learn, Russian, Spanish, Italian, or Finnish? Well, that might take a while, much longer than for them to actually be able to apply what we do in our language. And that's how we created the Event Design Collective, which is really people that do what we do in their own space, equipped with our brand and our toolkits in their local language in order to kind of scale that business. So that's where we're at right now. 18,000 users. We have 2,500, I think 2,700 trained professionals. Every year, 600-700 students are taking the program. So it's really cool to see other people do what we do and watch it from the sideline, watch it grow as time progresses. So it's been an exciting journey. We wrote a book about that with some case studies in 2016, which is now 5 years ago. And we're about to publish our second book with the collective called Design to Change. So that's coming out in June.
Yeah. Awesome story. And we go a little bit more detailed into the book if you're up to later. But before we do that, I would like to double click on a couple of things. First, high level. I'm working a lot, and a couple of listeners are from large corporations. And it sounds so easy when you tell that story. It's like, yeah, I have had this idea and it's getting to be a success. But it's most probably it wasn't that, and you have given already a couple of insights on that. It was not, it's not straightforward. It's not like, yeah, it's a development curve and you're done. It's like, yeah. So how did you start up with, was it just a vision? Was it just an idea? And how did you learn over time? How did you bring the learnings into your business to inform yourself in what is the right next step?
I think looking back, it's always easy to see how it evolved. And we made a little visual timeline. I'm happy to send you the link so you can kind of scroll through it, because those are some of the milestones and highlights of what we've gone through. At first, it really took us over a year to crack our thinking, right? From like, there's lots of good literature in our space, right? About return on investment of events, and about visual thinking, and about design thinking, and about Imagineering, and a lot has been written about experiences and what events do and how events work. Everyone has experience with it. It's like restaurants or hotels, right? We've all been to them, so we all have an opinion. What made it hard is we tried, or we attempted without knowing, to create a new language around how people talk about it, how they address that. And apparently we had been speaking part of that language because we saw this happening in a parallel space. I think through the board of, being on the international board of Meeting Professionals International, running into Alex Osterwalder, for me was an epiphany that I only saw, later on when we first started working with this. I was fascinated by how simply you could explain the complexity of a business. And then even apply it to a mission-driven organization like the one that we were on the board of, right? So we were redesigning how chapters would function in relation to, the organization in the center, with fiduciary responsibilities and all the things that, people in large businesses are concerned about on a daily basis, whether you're a public company or whether you are a scaled business. Everybody runs into their responsibilities and, functional jobs, but also the emotional jobs, the social jobs, and some of the basic needs that people have. And events are a gentle escape to that daily, run-of-the-mill experience that people have working in a larger corporations or whatever it might be. And that escapist behavior that some of them have experienced. If you ask people what are some of the best events in your life, right, or what are some of the best moments in your life, they're usually connected to events. Like pivotal moments that change people's lives are because they meet other people or they experience other things in another place and they're in a different mindset. And so if you are able to look at that like a camera, right, like we are using, a certain type of audio right now, a certain type of camera, the camera goes at 50 frames per second. If you could slow that shutter speed down, right, and look at your life through that lens week by week or maybe event by event, you would probably be able to retrace what altered the course of your life, right? And everybody has a journey, but none of these journeys are the same. But if you cluster those experiences because you bring those people together to one place and you can orchestrate the entry to the exit behavior, which is something that we are hotwired to do, right? All of us can observe behavior, right? We're all behavioralists in some way or other. If you're a parent, if you're a son, if you're a daughter, if you're a mother, if you're a sister, whatever, we all know how to study other people's behaviors and have an opinion about it, right? We have a belief and an opinion about that behavior.
Yeah.
The problem with that is it's so usually skewed and biased, is that you need multiple people to consider that behavior to then be able to describe it. And that's why I think design thinking with a team of people became one of our go-to places to be able to have better predictability power over, if you do this, then what will a group of people do, right? Without forcing groupthink onto them. But anyway, all of these practices that we've seen over and over again, in hindsight, I'm super happy that I was locked up in a hotel for 5-6 years at a time, in my first 2-3 jobs, because the context was kind of the same. The service providers were kind of the same. But what changed was the people coming in and out the front and back door, right? And if you study that over time and you see the repetition of behaviors happening, I think something happens in your brain. It's like decoding a puzzle. It's like figuring out what actually happened. And because you want it to go well, you're trying to align all of the stars in such a way that whatever it is that they are coming in for actually gets delivered, because you notice that gives better satisfaction, which at the end of the day means better bottom line expenditure, revenue, revenue per available room, as the hoteliers like to call that. So it's just like real estate, I guess, where, if people rent you real estate, the cycle might be slightly longer than in a hotel, but it's very much the same, right? Anyway, so how do you so sometimes, we look back and we go, did we actually turn a piece of paper, right, into a business? And in hindsight, we can say, yeah, we did that, right? Is that enough? No, because it's not about the paper. It's not about the canvas. It's about the outcome of what people do with it, right? So, and that's why we continuously tinker with how do people use it? How do we prove that it's working? How to use it historically? How to use it in the future? How do you string these things together? Which is a practice that grows over time. And so we have this one mantra, which is, let's create the problem first, and then we'll see how we'll solve it, because we have enough brain power to kind of crack most problems. And so whenever a client came up to us with a question, like I remember one of our first consultancy clients was a company in Austria that makes cochlear implants. Did we know a lot about cochlear implants? No. Did we know about Austria? No. Did we know about the team that was there? No. But, we did know a thing or two about events. And by listening and working with that team through what is now the event design using the event canvas methodology, we cracked the problem and were able to deliver something that they weren't seeing because they were so close to the problem. And I think this is probably the core lesson that I can have here is the ability to zoom out of a problem and zoom back in, and getting others, people outside of the space looking at the same problem through a different lens and talking about that with a common language can be extremely, can create breakthrough thinking, I think. And not just thinking, but also doing. You can convert that very easily into action. Yeah. Because events are very visible, highly risky, right? They can make or break your brand. They can make or break your reputation. But that's why, good leaders like a good event, because, it puts them in the zone.
Absolutely. So when you started, what was it from a vision perspective already clear that it will be as big as it is today? Or was it more like, let's figure it out?
Yeah, we never thought of it as a business. So that happened by accident, right? So I don't think I'm a born entrepreneur myself, but I did discover that entrepreneurship can be a very exciting ride, and it's something that I can highly recommend, right? Yeah. But it's not like, I woke up one day and said, I think tomorrow I'll be an entrepreneur, right? No, it doesn't work like that. At least it didn't for me.
It's quite interesting to see the parallels to a lot of successful companies. Like you start with figuring out how you solve a problem rather than how you build a business. So it's there some theoretical thinking like, I need to start up a business and then figure out which problem I'm solving. I'm not sure that if that's working long term.
There's an order and sequence to understanding a problem, but also being fascinated by something, right? Yeah. You could have a coup de foudre with a problem and then lose yourself in it for the rest of your life. I'm sure that happens, right? But sometimes problems and their complexity, right? To make something very complex seem trivial, it's probably one of the hardest problems, right? Yeah. But unless you focus on something very specific and persevere and have extreme grit in trying to crack that problem, and you find allies, people in your environment that get just as geeky about this as yourself, because that's the other thing. I think you need allies to show that kind of grit and perseverance. And just like event design, I think running a business over time is a team sport. It's not a solo sport. At least if you want to scale and make it time resistant. And the ability to connect to people that have the problem, right? So it's very noble to be able to crack a problem. It's fantastic, but if the set of problems is not infinite, or if you do not connect to where the problems are and you cannot make the connection, you're screwed, right? It doesn't work. It's not gonna fly. Yeah.
Then you mentioned Creative Commons, and most probably a lot of my listeners have no clue about what you have been talking. Can you iterate a little bit around that topic?
So most people know copyright, right? If people copyright a picture or a book or patent a product for that matter, right? Whatever it might be, they put a claim on the fact that that's theirs, right? So when we publish the Event Design Handbook is copyrighted by our publisher, BIS Publishers, and us as authors, because they want to make sure that somebody else doesn't go and take a piece of it and then says it's theirs, right? So that's the opposite truth of the Creative Commons. So the Creative Commons comes in various forms and fashions. If you're not familiar with it, Creative Commons is the ability to give something away for free, but make sure that it's attributed to its source, right? Which means that people always point back that this thing came from there. And it operates under 4 different variables. So ours operates under attribution, so you want to make sure you know where it's from, right? No derivatives, which means you cannot take the event canvas, change a box or change one name and then say it's yours, right? Or call it the event blah blah canvas or whatever and then make it that. The third thing is that it's non-commercial, which means that technically, people can use this for free and use it at large, but they cannot make money off of it. So a software developer cannot take our thing and turn it into their business, so to say, without our permission. And so these are the toggles that you can kind of play around with, to set what your asset. In this case, it's just a piece of paper that's the event canvas and has 14 boxes. But we did that so that we give away the asset first to spread the asset, right? So anyone can download it for free. People that have our permission can translate it into Polish, Russian, Japanese, or Arabic, as it's been done already. But the name event canvas is trademarked, which means that the event canvas as a word itself is not something you can toy with. And a lot of the materials around it are copyrighted as ours, right? We realized very early on, and this was by the example that the team at Strategizer, has also done that with the business model canvas. I thought it was fascinating, right? So you give away your intellectual property, so it scales.
Yeah.
But ultimately, people will go back to the source when the stakes become high enough, right? So if you really have a tough problem to crack, you'll know where to find those people that created it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's where the attribution is a very important thing, but also protecting your business in ways that make sure that when it's applied in the proper way. I think that's one of our concern is, we couldn't care less about giving away the canvas in itself. It was just a very basic decision at first. But we want to make sure that it delivers the results that it should deliver. And that's why we've probably created the systems around it to make sure people can use it to their advantage. So Creative Commons is nothing more, nothing less than you can almost compare it to, the modern non-fungible token, right? So not making it simpler, but, by saying that something was created at a specific point in time by a specific point of people that are able to connect that thinking to that piece of paper, so to say, or it could be a picture, it could be anything, right? Creative Commons. Look it up on Wikipedia and you'll find all of the various ways it can be used. But the one thing we realized very early on is that you cannot own a process.
Yeah.
So let me repeat that. You cannot own a process, right? And I had to think about that for a long time, because when we wrote down our thinking in the facilitation kit of how to use the event canvas, you cannot own that. We can copyright the facilitation kit, so you can't copy it, and we can translate it to different languages. But you cannot own a process. You cannot patent it. You cannot put a copyright on it. It doesn't work. So you have to give it away in order for it to scale.
Yeah.
And our mission is rid the world of mediocre events. That would be the negative interpretation, right? The positive interpretation is we want to equip people with the ability to create events that matter. And if that's your mission, then you have to make sure that anything you do helps people do that. And the Creative Commons is probably one of the most basic decisions we took that was a good one.
Yeah. Is it then just to dive a little deeper, and then we go up again, I promise. Is it then as well that you need to sign up for it, or is it how does it work from a process perspective for those listeners who might be interested in diving into that?
Yeah, so the best way to see that is to if you go to eventcanvas.org, you leave your email address, your name, and where you came across it, I think is what we ask. And by clicking on the button, you agree to the Creative Commons license.
Yeah.
Right? So that also gives you, the event canvas, it also gives you the first 100 pages of the event, design handbook. So we give away half of the book because we're pretty sure that once you see the first half, you'll probably want to buy the second half. And the first half gives you everything you need to know about the event canvas itself. But the application, the case studies, and the deeper thinking behind it comes in the second part. So I think you have to be confident in how you give away things. Giving is probably the biggest boomerang you can do for amplifying your brand or your business, right? But you have to do it in a smart way. And so we use an accelerant curve, let's say, that we had applied it from day one, but later we heard that there was a methodology that people use called the accelerant curve, and this is very often you do something and then in hindsight you go, oh, somebody actually wrote up how that works. Oh, cool. Now let's revisit how we did it and see if we can improve and tweak that, right? Yeah. And so the accelerant curve basically goes from, there's two axes, right? So the ease of access or the ease of being able to get it and the relative perceived value on the second axis.
Yeah.
And so the free download of the canvas is highly accessible, right? And the relative value is low, or at least the perceived value is low because you can get it for free.
Yeah.
But once you download the canvas, you might want to buy the book. The book is, I don't know, 29 euros, I think, right? Of which, if you know the publishing model, you spend all this time making the content of a great book, and Dennis does fantastic visuals, and we got an editor to actually make it look really pretty too, because it was 3 guys writing it, and 70% of our audience is female. So we had to make sure that the colors and the way that this thing actually works appeals to the right type of audience.
Yeah.
And so Crystal did a great job of making it look the way it looks, the right colors, and that really hurts. It's like, no, we're 3 Dutch guys. We thought the front cover needed to be orange, right? He said, no, it needs to be yellow. No, we're like, what do you mean yellow? It took quite some convincing to get, Ruud, Dennis, and myself to change our thinking. But that became the basis of our brand. Yeah. All of the colors in the book are quite, pastel-like colors, right? Which, give me a color swab, and these are probably not the colors that we would have selected if we had, our hand in this thing. So you also have to know what to let go of, and work with people that are experienced and have expertise in something that your own shortcomings in. We do have a philosophy that I want to know how difficult something is first before I outsource it. So I have a respect for what it is, right? I can make a pretty decent video, but if I want a really good video, now I know why I'm paying what I'm paying, right?
Absolutely, I can tell you.
Whether it's a website, whether it's the DTP of a book, whether it is, the print quality of something that you make, the badge that you design, there are people that do just that and do it very, very well. And you have to allow yourself to surrender to that expertise because it will pay itself back very handsomely in time. I think quality survives anything, even a COVID crisis. And if you don't, and that's the only thing I would be like super rigid on, is like branding. You've got to be brutal.
Yeah.
So I'm a brand extremist. Yeah.
That's good, because I can tell you, coming from a large brand, that's what these guys did perfectly over 70 years.
Yeah.
And that's why almost everyone knows that brand.
Yeah.
Good. Let's zoom out a little bit again. Mm-hmm. And let's look into innovation into the event space. So what are what is your view on innovation in the event space? What's happening, what's not happening? And of course, we're now in early 2021, where we are basically a year of lockdown, which I guess was quite a different way of looking at events than before the whole COVID crisis or COVID impact, let's say it like this. So how do you see innovation in the space of events?
So the way I see that, and the parallel I like to draw is the parallel to music, right? If you look at the analog music and the limited set of notes that we have to choose from, hundreds of years of music was being made, right? There's a few innovations that have happened, right? We went from 5 lines in Gregorian to maybe, 8 lines that we can draw our notes on, and then we have some helping things. And but it's pretty much been the same for a long time. And then came along digital music, right? Early 80s, right? Late 70s, early 80s. And it's people like Herbie Hancock and a whole bunch of other people, right? But let me just take that example because I'm a jazz fanatic, who have started experimenting with digitalizing in zeros and ones those original analog choices that you could make as a musician or as a composer. And there's never a shortage of music nor appreciation of it in any form or shape. The only thing that's happened is analog and digital has gotten blended. And the medium in which it's transported has changed over time. And I think that's the exact same thing that's happening to events. Only we're about 30 to 40 years late to the game. Right? So yes, the innovators have been doing what we're doing right now for the better part of 15, 18, 20 years, right? Only the rest of the tribe wasn't connected, right? So it was a few strangers experimenting with strange things, like probably the way Herbie Hancock felt in 1984, trying to explain to a couple of kids on Sesame Street what it is that a sound sample can do to, getting that across through a bunch of loudspeakers using a computer and a mouse, right? But people looked at him as if he was some strange alien. Now, anybody, I was looking yesterday at a guy here in Switzerland took a helicopter yesterday, and an events company put him with his DJ set in the back of a helicopter and another helicopter and 7 camera points and made this, live stream track of him mixing music in a helicopter and flying over the Alps. Was it original? No. Because in September in Cappadocia, or I forget how you pronounce it exactly, in Turkey, a guy did this flying a hot air balloon, with 80 other hot air balloons, doing an hour and a half of live mixing from a hot air balloon, which is way cooler, right? So it's all about form and structure and what it's supposed to do, right? The most basic thing I try to think about when you think about innovation is, how does something create value and why is it relevant for you, right? If you're in retail or in the real estate business, as an example, what does that mean for you, right? And the only way in which you can measure that is through behavior change. And so if behavior change creates value in the intended direction of change, then you're innovating. Being able to put your finger on where the innovation happens is the hard part for most people. But because we have decoded how the events create value through that behavior change and those 14 building blocks of the event canvas, by creating the articulation of what the change is, by adding the restrictions in the frame of all of the design restrictions, and then prototyping how you could do that, I think that's innovation, but it comes from the brain power of the people that are part of your thinking team that go through the design thinking. So I think the innovation comes from humans, essentially. The tools we use keep changing, and the adoption of the tools has dramatically increased, right? So our digital dexterity in the last 18 months has skyrocketed, right? Even for our parents, right? Or the older school teachers, right? Or, I think we've just been in a forced kind of vortex of change. But to those that have been doing this for a while, nothing really has changed that much. I think the events industry has been caught with its pants down, with a lack of innovation, if you would call innovation at large something, right? Because we've added a design frame, which was you can no longer get on a plane, travel to the other end of the world, crawl into a ballroom and walk out 3 days later, and have a pipe and drape exhibit for 3 days trying to meet people, right? If that's the business model, it's quite archaic. So then people try to replicate what that looks like in digital. It's become this skeuomorphic kind of, let's build pipe and drape on a computer screen and see if people still want to come and see the pipe and drape. No, right?
Not going to work.
It's not about theatricals, it's about cinematography. You've got to think like a TV producer. So it's taken a long time for people to wrap their heads around it. But there are many good examples of how this can be done, right? And this is typically what we do is, we're just working on a project with the largest provider of free knowledge on the internet, because I cannot call out their name. But if you look it up, I'm sure you'll find it. rapid prototyping, thinking as a group, coming up with design restrictions, adding them. It's super simple. We know what the restrictions are, right? Jens is landlocked in Germany. Ruud is landlocked in Basel in Switzerland. We are connecting using a medium called Zoom and a microphone and things. Well, in 2015, we built an event for the Internet Society where 16 people in a boardroom in New Zealand could connect to 80,000 people across the planet. So they opened the boardroom conversation to the whole audience. What did it require? Nothing more than we're using today, the two of us, right? And a shoestring budget. So I think innovation comes from taking the restriction, putting it into play, adding that as rocket fuel for thinking about the options, and then coming up with different prototypes of how to most effectively get from behavior A to behavior B. The difficult part is it's not just for you. It's for all of the stakeholders, right? Yeah. The event owner, the participants, the speaker, the exhibitor, whoever might be involved, they all have a different stake. Because you layer and sandwich those stakes, sometimes one person's pain is the other person's gain, and then you have a value proposition. So decoding is the hard part if you don't know how to do it, because you need that language. And like we know, when I was 8, learning French was easy. But when I moved to Switzerland, when I was, 39, was slightly more difficult because, German hadn't changed, but I had changed, right? Yeah. My brain's plasticity was less than it used to be.
I can tell you, I've tried to learn Russian.
That sounds like a daunting task.
Yeah. We managed to get a little bit of it, but far away from being good. And then I've seen others where the kids learned it in a couple of months.
But Jens, isn't it fascinating? So one thing it took me 4 languages to realize was that actually by making the effort of learning a little bit about it, but understanding a lot.
Yeah.
Right? So as a Dutch person, I can understand German fluently, right?
Yeah.
I come to the south of the Netherlands, so my dialect is quite close to what Swiss German is here in Basel. But I also realized because my dialect and the dialect here are so similar, it was very hard to learn one from the other, to distinguish them. But I also learned that it's okay not to be perfect in speaking the language and still speak it, right?
Absolutely.
My toes used to cringe when my dad was trying to speak French, and sometimes they still do, but much less now than back when I was a teenager. Because, he went through the same thing I went through, trying to learn German. But playing with that as a human being, right? I understand all of it. I can make my fair share of mistakes and get away with it. Is actually a much easier way of connecting to other people than trying to pretend that you can speak it perfectly.
Yeah, and that's so important. I mean, it also shows the appreciation of if you are in a country and you try, they know, or they get fairly quickly that you are a foreigner and that you are most probably not perfect in their language, but you just try it, and that's already appreciation for them. And then the connection happens way deeper than if you are not trying at all. I've seen that over and over again.
And as you're saying that, Jens, I'm realizing that that's the very skill you need to be able to help people think, right? Yeah. For people to open up, you have to be vulnerable. So when you go into a company not knowing anything about cochlear implants and asking maybe not just the stupid questions, but being able to question the assumptions that they're making for themselves in a very naive way is your gold dust to gaining trust. And at the end of the day, events are trust accelerators, right? It's like, how can you get much more trust in a short period of time? It's by spending that time together and being vulnerable together, right? Yeah. Maybe learning something together, because then you stick together, which is what happens at education or executive education or in trainings or whatever it might be. But those are very powerful human mechanisms of connection. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would like to move into the book. Yeah. Tell us about the new book that's coming out.
Awesome. So the old book, and actually they're companion books, it's not a prequel or a sequel. So the original book, Event Design Handbook, is systematically design innovative events using the event canvas. So this is a book about process, right? How do I apply this to, and this is the language. The new book is called Design to Change. And Design to Change is actually, the subtitle is Elevating Your Abilities to Look and Act Beyond the Now. and it talks about the delta. So if this book is about the process, then the sequel book, the Design to Change, is the book about the outcome. This is language, this is conversation, right? Having the conversation based on outcomes with event owners, people that own the problem, is one of the skill sets you really need to shift a good conversation into the right direction, right? Some people leave that to chance, and that's quite risky. So this is a way to prepare for that. It's a way to think about horizons of change. What happens when you go above a horizon and look at the next one? Zooming in, zooming out, changing of perspectives, the ability to distinguish between needs and wants, the ability to think outcome based and talk that language, even if you're in love with a process or if you're convinced that a process needs to be applied, right? Which is a common booby trap for many people, because then they completely miss how they talk to each other. Then very pragmatic thing. How do you become successful at claiming time and getting design on the agenda in the first place? Because if it's not, you can have all the skill sets of being able to apply something that you know works as a team. But if you don't get permission to do it, or if you don't get the business to, or if you don't take that first step and nobody cares, then it's of no value, right? So this book is really the companion guide between language, conversation, process versus outcome, and the ability to become a trusted advisor and identify needs in people instead of just listening to their wants. That's kind of what this does. Yeah.
How did you came up with the book idea?
Again, it's applied knowledge turned into words and pictures, right? So Dennis Lyer, who's a master, as you know, in taking a 3D situation and what happens and hitting it overhead with a big hammer to turn it into a 2D picture. Right. It's kind of like the applied thinking of using the event canvas in many different scenarios with our clients and with the trainings, and turning that learning into the next thing. And in this instance, we've also 2 years ago started an EDC mastermind for people that are certified event designers, because they kept coming back saying, "Ooh, what's next? What's next?" Right? I was like, "What are you guys up to? What are you guys doing?" And of course, a lot of the work we do is proprietary with our clients, so we cannot share it freely. But in running into a guy called Paul Wilkins at an event, right? So this is how these things work. He's become our trusted advisor in how our business develops, but also we are working with him in something we call the EDC Mastermind. And actually, what I showed you here, which still has a lot of Post-its and stuff on it, is actually the prototype. So our second EDC Mastermind, which is a think and do tank that happens every month, and we have a 3-day kind of thing that happens in November every year, is where we get our most geeky certified event designers together. And we had started writing this book in April last year through raw conversations, and the raw conversations were trimmed back by an editor into 4 elements: questions to ask, principles, process, and outcome. So, and every chapter was carved through conversations. And then we tested that thinking with our masterminds for 3 days. We sent them a PDF copy, and it was 2 days and then two weeks gap. And on the 3rd day, they all received a surprise copy of the alpha version of the book. So it was like we surprised them with a real hardcover book that was shipped across the globe to where they were as a surprise. And they were then involved we reviewed every chapter. We made an audiobook out of it. Our colleague Anthony Vade, over Christmas, because he has a radio background, read out the whole book because we couldn't look at the words anymore. We couldn't see it, right? So our problem was, how do we consume it differently? Yeah. We then offered that to people because conversations happen in audio. And then now we've just reviewed the whole book. We're now finalizing it. And it's the alpha version of the book. The audiobook is available on our website because we want people to contribute. And now actually the book will be augmented with online conversations and applications of this as a result of how we experimented with the book. And the book is coming out in print 15 June. It's going to be landing on people's doorsteps, and they can pre-order it on our site and get access to the audiobook already. So you can first hear it, and then later you will see it and feel it.
That's awesome. I also love the prototyping aspect of it, because that's like true innovation, where you involve like partners and groups and the community in developing something which is most probably way more valuable to the end readers than if you're like a group of 3 or 4 building something, because it's evaluated basically on the go with a lot of more people who are experts in their fields and supporting you with their inputs as well. Yeah. Love that.
And also rewarding them. So
yeah,
those people that really contributed to the book each get a page, right?
Yeah.
And we acknowledge that. And I think, and it actually made me think that every good event probably deserves a book, right? If you cannot write a book about the event, about the behavior change that happens or what actually is addressed, the content is probably not thought through enough.
Yeah.
So this is the testimony to the EDC Mastermind of 2020, I guess, but also based on the practice and experience of 6-7 years of road testing and doing, using the language and what conversations resulted out of it. We could have never reversed the order of the books, but the reader can reverse the order. Meaning an event owner can pick up the Design to Change book and get their executive, perspective, because Paul takes 3,000 words per chapter and minces it back down to 300 words in a 1.5 minute summary. What does it mean for the event owner, right? So it's very perspective biased, and having that ability also requires distance. You cannot write the one part and expect to know the other part as well, because you're too deep into it. Yeah. Anyway, it's just the power of humans at work, and all you have to do is orchestrate it. But it takes a little diligence and grit to see it through.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to seeing the end result and having a hard copy for myself as well. So let's go into the last part of where I'm taking a couple of questions outside of the context we have discussed so far.
Yeah.
So if you can be part of or run a project that is connected to every human being on Earth, and everyone will be impacted by it, what project would it be and why would you choose it?
I think we're already all involved in that project. And I think it's, some have called it, the 2030 UN DGP, right? Sustainable Development Goals. If we want to make what's happening on this planet something we want to keep doing, also for our kids and the kids of our kids, we're all in this kind of, global event of change that we're all part of, right? Because everybody plays a little part, and there's a couple of billion of us doing it. The thing is, it's a stackable thing. So it's a puzzle with many, many puzzle pieces. And I think what like the project there for us is to look at a bigger picture. I think, maybe it's a bit preaching to our own choir, but we look at every, it's like the nail and hammer problem. Everything we look at looks like an event to us, right? What we're doing here, recording a podcast, is an event, right? There's Jens, there's Ruud, there's an entry, there's an exit behavior, there's an audience that's asynchronously listening to this. You are part of this little event. So if you do nothing as a result of being part of this 45-minute conversation, you will have created no value, right? So it's about creating massive actions from small incremental things that we are focused on. And then when we have a larger group of people, is how do we embed that into it? That's one project. The other one for me is being the best possible amateur Alphorn player on the planet, and having fun while doing it. Because I also know that professional musicians sometimes get frustrated by the music, and I would hate for that to happen. So I encourage the fact that there's many amateur event professionals across the planet, and I want them to get better and better and better. Because trust me, when you do this professionally, it has a lot of moving parts and you really want to understand how they work. But the supply chain is phenomenal, right? So back to the Alphorn, it hasn't changed in the last, probably century or two. It's the oldest mobile phone version that I could find to communicate from kilometers that you ran out of beer when you're on top of a mountain. It carries extremely far, but it's extremely difficult to master, right? It's so simple, it's complex. So so Alphorn mastery, and looking at every event through the lens of how can it contribute to how we look after what we do for the next generations. That's kind of the bigger thing.
That's a good one. So where will you be in a year from now? And you can take that personally and or business wise.
A year from now, on the business level, let's put it this way, I'd love to see a year from today 500 certified event designers. We're at about 300 now, and we said we'll double the numbers every year. But I also realize that this is not for everyone, right? And doubling becomes more difficult as the numbers go higher, right? So you also have to think about that. Also, this design to change. So having better conversations, enabling people to have better conversations, using the process, not being so obsessed with the event canvas, but stepping away from that and letting it do its work. By having better conversations and capturing them in a way so that they create value for other people. So for me, the augmented layer of the Design to Change handbook, I mean, the handbook is a question of finishing now. The Design to Change book. It's the augmented layer that will require grit and persistence. And I think, Jens, you're an example there. You set yourself a goal, right? You record videos at the speed that most people can not even consume them, right? So
I know
this ability to create and capture and perpetuate and create value out of plenty comes quality, right? And it's kind of like the internet. There's a lot of garbage out there, but at the end of the day, at top of the pyramid, the cream becomes better and better. And so I think this is a capacity that we are looking to develop and develop systematically as well. So a year from now, we'll have made some strides, hopefully, in that direction. And I may have become a slightly better Alphorn player too.
Yeah. And I want to see that one day live as well.
Absolutely. You're cordially invited to one of the upcoming. So every year there's an Alphorn week in Arosa. This year I invited my dad to come and join me as his birthday present, because he's also a musician, and he took my second Alphorn and I gave it to him last year. And this year we're going to go a week into the mountains. And if you go to awesome. Arosa in the second week of July, after a week, your ears will be ringing, because it's like 60, 70 Alphorn players spending the week there. It's amazing.
Cool. So last question is, how do you keep yourself informed? What are the different sources you get to inform yourself in your personal development and as well from a business context?
So that's a great question. I think I serendipitously scroll through many digital tools that I can use whilst walking my dogs or waking up in the morning or disconnecting from life. I try to take time to think, to process that. But I have an insatiable curiosity for things. I read a lot and I consume a lot of content. And then to process it, like I said, is walking the dogs, playing music to process, and cooking. Those are my three magic ingredients. If I stop cooking, my wife gets really worried.
That's a good sign.
Yeah. No, not that she doesn't cook, but she also cooks. But when I stop cooking, I get too stressed out. So yeah.
Yeah, but my wife has also a couple of sensors that she knows what's happening before it's happening.
This is like the sensory perception between the two humans that spend a lot of time together, right?
Absolutely. So I could talk a couple of more hours with you, but our time is up. I really appreciate that you take your time in being on the podcast. Thank you very much for being here. Where can people find you? How can people reach out to you?
Well, thanks, Jens, for the opportunity. I think I really appreciate your work and what you have built in a very short amount of time. They can find me probably through some of the links that are going to be below this podcast, but the simple one is eventcanvas.org. That's easy to remember. If you click on team and about and team, you will see my details there. Or just Google my name and then stuff might come up. I'm not the Fluxus artist that makes stamps, which is the other Ruud Janssen. Apparently there's a Dutch guy that's very much into making stamps. That's not me. But all the other stuff, hashtag event canvas or eventcanvas.org, or, my name doesn't travel well. Ruud is not a name that worked well in France nor in the English speaking countries. And Janssen is a very familiar name that a lot of Dutch people have.
Yeah.
With the combination of the two, you'll probably find me. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much for being on the show, Ruud. It was a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take me to another place where the fairy tales don't end.